Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. Let's make our way over to the radiator cap. You want to be extremely careful and make sure that the radiator cap is cool to the touch. Essentially, you didn't just come back from a nice road test. Assuming it is cool, carefully press it down and turn it counterclockwise to remove it. As you start lifting it up, make sure you lift it up and away from your face. The next thing you want to do is inspect that radiator cap. Make sure it doesn't look torn, worn, or damaged in any way. Assuming it looks good, set it aside. Now let's make our way under the front of the vehicle. Commonly, there might be some sort of splash shield in this area. Ours is missing. If you did happen to have one, just go ahead and remove that now. The next thing you want to do is make your way up along the driver's side. You're going to be looking for the radiator. On the driver's side, lower aspect of the radiator is where you're going to find the drain. Now for this drain, if you were to just go ahead and start draining it now, it's going to come right down onto this cross member here. With that said, if you happen to have a piece of hose, you can carefully slide it over the end of the drain. Make sure it faces down to a collection bucket so you can recycle the fluid properly. I'll just take this hose, slide it up along the front of that cross member and put it onto the drain. Now I'll put my collection bucket in place and we'll go ahead and turn this counterclockwise until fluid starts coming out. All right, let's close this drain, clean up our mess, and if you have the lower splash shield, put that on now. Now that the cooling system's completely drained, let's make our way back up top. Now up top, the next thing that we're going to want to do is start removing the rest of our hoses along the top of the radiator. For this hose, just go ahead and squeeze that clamp and slide it off. As you remove your hoses, give them a little squeeze. Make sure they're soft and pliable and they're not torn, worn, or damaged in any way. Assuming they're good, continue on by setting each aside. Now let's move along to our other upper hose here. This clamp's a little bit different. I'll squeeze it with some pliers, once again slide it up and out of the way, and then continue by removing the hose from the radiator. Let's follow that hose along the cooling fan assembly. Set it aside, making sure it doesn't leak out anywhere. Now let's continue following over towards the driver's side of the fan shroud assembly. You're going to find two wiring harnesses here. There's one right out in the open. To remove this one, use a small pocket screwdriver. We'll carefully come in along the passenger side of this and carefully get underneath the locking tab. Once you've made your way under there, continue on by carefully separating the wires. Now the next wiring harness is straight down in this area right here. You could carefully reach your hand down in there and gently go ahead and pop that apart, but typically it's going to be extremely difficult to put it back together. With that said, if you find that you have an issue reaching in here, or you just don't want to, you can continue on by removing the battery. I'll show you how to do that. Before you remove the battery, keep in mind, by disconnecting your battery terminals, you're going to lose your radio presets. Now to remove the battery, we're going to come right over to the positive battery terminal first. We'll carefully use a 10mm wrench and loosen up the mounting nut. While you're doing this, be very careful not to make contact between the positive and some sort of ground, such as the body of the vehicle. Once it's loose, carefully lift it up and off. Give it a quick inspection for corrosion and set that aside. Do the exact same thing for the negative battery terminal. Now at this point, we're going to continue on to removing the battery hold down. On one side of the battery hold down, you're going to have a 10mm headed bolt. Once you remove this from the body, generally you can just pivot this up. You don't have to do anything with this side except for down along the bottom. On the bottom of the mount, you'll find that you have a hook that latches in. Just go ahead and tilt it and pull it right out of there. There's that hook that I had mentioned. Now with gloved hands, carefully remove your battery and set that aside. Underneath the battery, you'll find a plastic battery tray. Go ahead and remove that as well. With that out of the way, you can see we have a nice clear view of this electrical connector. I'll continue by using a small flathead screwdriver. Carefully get in between the locking mechanism of the connector and gently pry. Now I'll carefully lift this up to separate it. Quick inspection. And now we're going to go ahead and take this right off of the fan assembly. Generally, you can use a trim tool or even a small screwdriver to remove this. Let's set that wiring aside. Now we can start removing the coolant hose from the driver's side of the radiator. We'll squeeze the clamp, move it aside, and remove that hose from the radiator. Keep in mind there still could be coolant in the radiator. Make sure you have a collection bucket in the area. Now let's make our way over towards the passenger side. We're going to be looking for that lower radiator hose. Find the area where the hose connects onto the radiator, squeeze the clamp, move the clamp, and then remove the hose from the radiator. It's a good idea to make sure you put your collection bucket under this area. There we are. Now let's make our way over here and remove our two 12mm headed bolts. We'll grab those mounts, give them a quick inspection, and set them aside. Now with this pulled away, we're going to continue on along each side of the radiator. You're going to find that you have a 10mm headed bolt on either side. Remove the pair. Now once you have the bolts out, we're going to continue removing the upper plastic piece here. Looking along the rearward side of this, you're going to find that you have some locking tabs. We'll carefully use a small pocket screwdriver and gently pry on those tabs. And then we should be able to lift this up and off. Let's make our way underneath the driver's side of the vehicle again. We're going to be looking for where the radiator and the AC condenser are located. On the driver's side, what we want to do is carefully try pressing up on this plastic area. You'll find that that lifts up the radiator, the cooling fan, and the AC condenser. We'll just slide that a little bit forward so it doesn't fall back into place. Now looking directly at the bottom corner of this, you're going to find on each side of the radiator, there's a 10mm headed bolt. Remove the bolt from each side. Now it's common for these little bolts right here to break off. That's okay, because they screw into the radiator. We're replacing the radiator anyways, so we'll just also replace the mounting bolt. Now, do the exact same thing on the other side of the radiator. Now back up top, we can carefully start removing the radiator from the area. Keep in mind there could still be coolant in the radiator. Remove your radiator from the vehicle. The next thing that we want to do is prepare our mounting nuts. Now you'll notice with your kit, it came with a whole bunch of brand new nuts. All you want to do is slide it down into the slots on each of the corners of the radiator. So I've got those two in now. Slide it right in there as far as it can go. Now we'll go ahead and turn it over and do the same on the other side. Now once you have each of your mounting nuts located in place, continue on to your transmission lines. The vehicle that we're working on is a manual transmission, which means you do not need either of these transmission lines. To remove these, I'm going to use a 19mm wrench. Carefully get on the fitting and gently turn it counterclockwise so I can remove each of these. Now you'll notice on the tips of each of these, they come with a rubber boot. If you wanted to, you could carefully take that rubber boot and slide it over the end of each of these ports. Now we can carefully slide our radiator in place, being extremely careful not to damage any of our cooling fins. As we start sliding it down, you want to try to wiggle it back and forth to make sure you slide it around the cooling fan as necessary. Now from underneath the front of the car, we're going to carefully lift back up on this entire shroud here, including the radiator and AC condenser. Do the same on the other side. Now while we're underneath the vehicle, let's make our way to where the upper radiator hose connects onto the radiator. As you can tell, it's fairly easy to access from down here. We'll just go ahead and grab onto this and we'll slide it in position on the radiator. Squeeze that clamp and slide it back into its original position. Make sure that the radiator hose is completely tightened to the radiator. Make sure that your drain is tight by turning it clockwise. At this point, we're done underneath the front of the vehicle. If you happen to have had a splash shield, go ahead and put that back up now. Let's make our way back into the engine compartment. Let's take this plastic piece and get ready to put it in position. Now what you're going to notice is along the front of the plastic piece, you're going to have two holes, one on either side. That's where the AC condenser needs to fit into. So we'll just go ahead and slide that right over the AC condenser, little piton across the top. The next thing we want to do is start squeezing the fan and the radiator in towards the condenser and line up the locking tabs. Once you have those lined up, continue on by pressing them in. Now as we start pressing this down to lock in our locking tabs, you also want to make sure that you're pressing in the fan shroud to make sure it slides behind the area. Listen for a click from this side and do the exact same thing on the other. We'll give that a little wiggle to make sure it's secured. Start in your two mounting bolts and snug them up. Now that I have both of them started, we'll snug them up. We'll do the same on the other side. Now we can put on our mounting brackets. We'll slide them right over the radiator. Slide it into position. Start in your mounting bolts. Do the same on the other side. Once they're both started, go ahead and snug them up. With that mounted, let's continue on to our radiator hose. We'll slide that down along the bottom of the passenger side of the radiator, press it down as far as we can so it makes full contact with the radiator. Squeeze that clamp and slide it back into its original position. Double check that hose, make sure it's completely secure. Let's reconnect in our fans. We'll connect the gray connector to the gray connector. The black connector to the black connector. Once you have those connected in, give them a wiggle and make sure they're secure. Now let's move along to the wiring harness here. We'll press that in as well. Now that we have each of those wires connected in and secured, let's move along to the radiator hose and make sure we reconnect that to the fan shroud. Now let's follow our hose and make sure that we connect it on along the top of the radiator. Resecure your clamp. Give it a tug to make sure it's secure. Make sure it's put back in place. We'll move over to the other side of the radiator. Slide that overflow hose in place as far as you can against the radiator. Squeeze the clamp, put that in place as well. Now it's time to put back in our battery tray. Looking at the bottom of the battery tray, you're going to find two locating pitons. Looking at this area here, you're going to find the holes that they need to fit into. Go ahead and slide this down and into place. Let's reinstall the battery. Before you reconnect your battery terminal ends, make sure you clean the areas on the battery where the two wires are going to go, and of course the ends of the wires before you put them on. Now let's reconnect our positive battery terminal. Use your 10mm to snug it up. We'll give that a wiggle. Do the same to the negative. Now we can reattach our battery hold down. We want to make sure we have the hook facing towards the driver's side. All the way down there, there's a small area in the body of the vehicle for it to slide into. Now we'll just bring this right over and connect it into the body of the vehicle. Snug it up. Grab your battery, make sure it's completely secure. If it's not, continue adjusting with your wing nut. Okay friends, now it's going to be time to go ahead and fill our cooling system. Now there's several ways of doing this. The most common way would be with a funnel of some sort, so you don't spill anything. When it's time to fill it, you want to make sure that you use 50-50 pre-diluted coolant. If you do use concentrated coolant, make sure you mix it 50-50 with distilled water. Now what you're going to want to do is continue filling the cooling system until you see no more air bubbles making their way out of your funnel. Okay, so I filled it up to the point that I had no more air coming out of the coolant system. The next thing that I have to do is start up the vehicle. I'm going to let it run for a little while. What I'm going to see is more air bubbles making their way up through the funnel here. Once that stops and I have plenty of heat coming out of my vents, I'll make my way back out here and close this off so I can remove it from the system. Okay, so now that it's full and I'm sure that I burped out all the air in the system, I'll put back on my radiator cap. Now once you have this closed, the next thing that you want to pay attention to is the overflow tank. You can find the overflow tank by following that overflow hose all the way over towards the passenger side. Now commonly, it's a good idea to make sure that you replace the coolant that's inside the overflow as well. You just put brand new fluid inside the cooling system, why not replace this? You don't necessarily need to remove the entire overflow so you can recycle that fluid. Generally, you can just use something that looks a little bit like this and siphon the fluid right out. Make sure you dispose of it properly with the rest of your coolant. After that, make sure you fill this back up to the full line, which you can see down along the forward aspect of it. Once you're sure it's full, go ahead and close it off. Okay friends, we got the car back together. A few last things to think about. You want to make sure you start up the car and you have plenty of heat coming out the vents. Aside from that, make sure you don't have any coolant leaks, and then close the hood, take it for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.